for a great 20th century American hero, Louis Armstrong.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
That was a tune called Cornet Suey. That's how we got our name, from the Louis Armstrong composition from 1925, Cornet Suey. We're very thankful that Louis wrote that song for us. So. Now, shortly after Louis was born, his father left the family, and his mother took he and his sister to live with Louis Armstrong's grandmother, and she lived in the roughest, the toughest part of New Orleans, Louisiana. Matter of fact, it was where all the houses of ill repute, all the speakeasies, the brothels, that's where they all were. But this is where all the jazz was. I mean, because all these places employed jazz musicians to keep their patrons happy while they were waiting to be happy. A young Louis formed a little singing group, and he would play for the passers-by at the doorways of these establishments. And he'd listen to the piano players, the bass players, the banjos, the drummers, the clarinetists, the trombonists, but he most loved and most could identify with were the cornetists. And they were the greatest cornetist players of all time. And right there in New Orleans, there was Bunk Johnson. Bunk Johnson had just a huge sound. People say you can hear Bunk Johnson play a trumpet from miles away on a clear night. Joe Oliver. Joe Oliver, who won so many cutting sessions that he earned the moniker King Oliver. And cutting session was any of the people that would employ the jazz bands. They would put them on the flatbed trucks during slow times, and they'd go through the city playing. And if two flatbed trucks met with two different bands at an intersection, they would have a competition who could play the hardest, the loudest, the fastest, the best. And Joe Oliver won so many of these, he earned the nickname King Oliver. And Louis Armstrong would follow him around during the street parades or anything and holding his cornet. And he just loved him. He worshipped him. This was his hero, Joe Oliver, King Oliver. But when Louis Armstrong was just 11 years old, he stole a pistol from his father's bureau. And he shot it off at 12 midnight on New Year's Eve to scare away the spirits from a new year. This is just as illegal then as it is now. Young Louis did it right in front of a policeman. Who just grabbed him, they took him to jail. There the judge said, "Son, you need some discipline," and sent him to the Colored Waifs Home, where Captain Charles Smith there noticed that young Louis had some musical ability, so he put him in the school's brass band. And young Louis started out playing tambourine, and then bass drum, and pretty soon bugle, and finally cornet, because he loved cornet. Within a year and a half, he was voted the leader of the band. This is one of the most proudest moments of his life. He talked about it every time he wrote anything about it, about how proud he was, not only to be a musician, but a leader in his own right. Now, when he got out of the Colored Waifs Home in 1914, he looked up his hero, his mentor, and that was Joe Oliver. And he traded odd jobs that he would do for Joe and Joe's wife for cornet lessons. And pretty soon, young Louis was good enough that playing cornet, that if Joe Oliver needed to take a night off, he would send young Louis in to take his place. And matter of fact, Louis Armstrong did it that full time for Joe Oliver in 1917 with the closing of Storyville. Yes, indeed. This is where Joe Oliver left for Chicago, and young Louis Armstrong took his place in New Orleans' hottest jazz band. That's Kid Ory's jazz band. So we're going to do two from Kid Ory's jazz band and also from that New Orleans tradition. Anytime you have a gathering of people or you have anything going on important, you always have a brass band. And when you have a brass band, you hear this beat right here. This is called the New Orleans Big Four, or the second line beat. Now, the second line is anybody in the neighborhood hearing this music and joining in on that parade. You would be, waving your handkerchiefs or strutting with your parasols, strutting your stuff, having a good time. That's known as the second line. So here we have John Gillick and that second line beat. Let's listen in. And here's two from that New Orleans tradition. The old second line and the new second line are Kid Ory's song. Here we go. said, 1917, Joe Oliver left New Orleans, and he left to go to Chicago. And he left because the Navy Department closed down Storyville. This is where the houses of ill repute for corrupting the morals of young sailors. Oh, yes. So everybody had to look for different work, because this is where all the musicians were being employed. This is their regular steady jobs. And houses of ill repute. Yes. I love saying houses of ill repute. It sounds so musical. So dignified, that's right. But finally, Louis Armstrong had to leave the only home that he knew, New Orleans, in 1919, and he joined the Streckfest Riverboat Cruise Lines in the Fate Marable Band. Now, many people think that Louis Armstrong didn't know how to read music. That's not true. He learned how to read music starting when he was in the cultivation home, and also with Joe Oliver. Joe Oliver used to play with a lot of different brass bands, even the white brass bands down in New Orleans. And young Louis Armstrong and Joe Oliver would be playing with these guys, and they knew how to read music. But Louis Armstrong really honed his craft of reading music in the Fate Marable Band. Matter of fact, there's a story about Louis Armstrong that when he was playing and he was still learning, and there's all the modifications for music are in Italian, and like for loud it's forte. And for very loud, it's, like they put more F's in there, And, and for quiet, it's pianissimo, or piano, pianissimo, it's P. So you put a P on the music, or PP for very softly. So they were doing some music and reading some music, and the director stopped the band and said, "Louis, you totally missed that PP right there, and you were playing so loud, nobody can hear you." He said, "BP, I thought that meant play proud." But he was always joking, always having a good time. So Louis Armstrong was in the Fate Marable Band, but he traveled up to St. Louis for the first time. This is where we hear young Louis Armstrong getting off the boat, the Sydney, and he was listening to some St. Louis musicians, but all the people were just going nuts over this young, handsome man from New Orleans. But he was going nuts over a guy named Charles Creth, who was a cornetist. Now, Charles was a very handsome man in St. Louis, and matter of fact, he had the most successful band, the Jazzomaniacs, Charles Crest and the Jazzomaniacs. But there were actually 3 different Jazzomaniacs jazz bands, and Charles Crest would hire a limo driver to take him to all the bands that were playing on Friday and Saturday nights, and he'd play just a little bit of a set, and then he'd go to the next band and play a little bit of a set. He did this rotated all night long. And but he was a very handsome man, very dapper dresser, had a wonderful tone on the cornet, played great. And but there's a legend associated with Charles Creth, and that he actually stopped a knife fight by playing a single note on his cornet. And I had the opportunity to play with Charles Creth's great-great-grandson, Charles Creth III. And I asked him, about this. And he said, "Oh, yes, it's absolutely true." Said one night, these 2 men got into a fight over a woman. Mm-hmm. Yes. Hard to believe, I know. And got in a fight over a woman, and Charles Creth played a high C on the cornet, and that's when the bouncer and the club manager hit these guys over the heads with clubs, knocked them out. Yeah. And by the way, Charles Creth went home with that woman. Because apparently that was Charles Creth III's great-great-grandmother. So we're going to play a song that Louis Armstrong heard Charles Creth play and also recorded in his career 26 different times. It is the most recorded jazz song in history, and it's about our hometown of St. Louis, Missouri. But when you talk about St. Louis, the city is called St. Louis. But when you talk about the blues, it's the St. Louis Blues. Louis style. Yes, indeed, baby. Oh, love it, Louis. Thank you. You having a good time? Oh, that is good. That is good. All right, this next part of the show over here. This is when Louis Armstrong received not an email. Telegram. He got a telegram from Joe Oliver in 1921. Said, "Come and join our band." And Joe Oliver was up in Chicago. Yes, indeed. King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band. And Louis Armstrong got on a train and he went up to Chicago, but the train was late getting to Chicago. Must have been a United train. Got up to Chicago and the band had already started playing. He had to catch a cab to the club where the band was playing, and there he came into the front door and he heard the most incredible thing he'd ever heard. He heard Joe Oliver's Creole Jazz Band. He heard Joe Oliver playing better than he'd ever played before with a really tight, smoking hot jazz band. And Louis Armstrong was just in shock because he was thinking, how am I going to, let alone sit in with these guys or be a member of the band? I just couldn't fathom it. It was the best thing he'd ever heard. And that's when Joe Oliver spotted him by the front door and motioned him up on the stage. Louis Armstrong quietly got out his cornet and started playing with Joe. There was all the old things that he remembered about Joe. He knew everything that Joe was going to play. They played some jazz, and Louis Armstrong knew just exactly where Joe was going to go because this was his hero. He heard everything about this. He knew what he was going to do. And they were fabulous. People were going crazy because nobody had ever heard anything like that hot two-cornet front line of the Creole Jazz Band. And this next song is going to be the first song that Louis Armstrong you can find in a commercially available recording. That's OK Records 1207. And it's the Dipper Mouth Blues, written by King Joe Oliver.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
That was a tight harmony of Joe Oliver and Louis Armstrong. And this is Tom Tucker. He's the co-leader of the band, and he's playing the part of King Oliver. So from now on, we'll just call him King Tuck. And notice a couple things, too, is that Tom has a handkerchief, and he's playing like Louis Armstrong played with a handkerchief. But what's the story in the handkerchief? Well, first off, Louis Armstrong, he sweated a lot. He did. He always, yeah, just like Tom does, yeah. Tom drinks a little bit at night. He just sweats all day. Yes, I know. Yes. But here's the other thing, though, too, is that it's a tradition. It's a tradition in New Orleans. This is where all the cornet players were. Everybody would come to New Orleans to see what these guys were doing. And the tradition was that you didn't want to give away your secret. So you would play with a handkerchief in your hand, and you would drape the handkerchief over your valve. Absolutely. So that's where the handkerchief came. So Bunk Johnson played with that. Also, Bunk showed Louis Armstrong, gave him lessons. Louis Armstrong did it because it's part of the New Orleans tradition, and also because he... Do you sweat a lot? You got all the good genes too, huh? So that's the tradition. Another thing too, let's talk about Joe Oliver and how he influenced a lot of people. Joe Oliver was like one of the great, you know, he started doing things with trumpets that nobody else did. He started playing with different things. Like I do use this. You know, anybody know what this is? Ashtray. No, it isn't. It's actually a mute. It's an ashtray mute. You can't find these in California or around here, but in Missouri, you still can find them. They bake like mutes. And they call it cup mute. Well, Joe Oliver was the guy that started using cup mutes. Yeah. Gives it a little bit more vocal sound. He also invented the thing called the solo tone mute. And that is what this is. Anything that you put inside of a trumpet besides a mouthpiece is called a mute. It modifies the sound of the trumpet. Solo tone mute. Invented by Joe Oliver. Louis Armstrong played a lot with mutes. He was a very loud trumpet player, and when he went into recording, they said, you know, you need to stand in the other room to record, or you need to do something. So Louis Armstrong a long time played with pixie mute and straight mutes. And that's what this is. So still loud, but not as loud as. So a lot of times you hear Louis Armstrong, he sounds a little thin in his tone. That's because he's using a pixie mute or a straight mute. All right. So 1921, let's see, something else happened while he was in the King Oliver's jazz band. And that's because King Oliver not only had that two cornet front line, yes, Louis Armstrong at that time was playing cornet and not trumpet, but they had something that was unheard of in the 20s. That was a woman piano player by the name of Lil Hardin.
That's right, honey.
Yes, Lil Hardin. Lil Hardin was a college-educated valedictorian of her class, classically trained pianist.
You know it too.
That's right. Who moved up to Chicago and was playing with one of the hottest jazz bands ever. Louis Armstrong was head over heels in love.
Yeah.
And Lil Hardin wanted nothing to do with that big hick from New Orleans. That's her own words. Until she was married to him less than a year later. And we're going to do a song, and I'm going to talk about Lil Hardin a little bit, because this is a song that she wrote. And for Louis Armstrong, I didn't even get credit for writing it until shortly before her death in 1971. This is Strutting with Some Barbecue. And by the way, barbecue is slang for a beautiful, long-legged woman with tasty ribs. Ladies and gentlemen, King Tut and Strutting with Some Barbecue. Louis, there's a good barbecue place really close by. St. Louis, you can't throw a stick without hitting barbecue place. And I love barbecue, I do. I'd be a skinny man if it weren't for barbecue. And chocolate.
Donuts.
And beer and donuts, okay. There's a long list, but yeah. Let's talk about Lil Hart. Lil Hart is very important. Lil Hart, married to Louis Armstrong. And she molded young Louis Armstrong. And she pushed him, and she prodded, and she did everything. Lil Hart was, classically trained pianist. She arranged for Louis Armstrong to take classical music lessons from the visiting impresarios that would come into Chicago. And young Louis, playing with piano players and conductors and different things, started changing the way he thought about music. Before Louis Armstrong, when they would play a tune, it would be just basically a soloist would copy pretty much what the vocalist did. So the melody line of a song became the melody line of the next solo. And it was just trading those solos between the vocalist and an instrumentalist. Louis started taking things apart. So instead of basing his solo on the melody line, he based it upon chord structure. So he would create a brand new melody line using the notes that were available from the chords that backed up that melody line. And this changed the way jazz has been played. Also the way that classical motif is, where you state an idea, then you modify that idea, modify it again, and then come back to the original statement. This is the way that jazz tunes are played, even to this very day. And it's because of Louis Armstrong. Also, Lil Hart didn't want to be married to any second cornetist in any band. So she prodded Louis Armstrong to be a soloist or leader of his own band. And finally, after a year and a half of being with Joe Oliver, Louis Armstrong left and moved to New York City to join the Fletcher Henderson Jazz Band. Now, Fletcher Henderson, along with Paul Whiteman, at the same time, had a great idea that their bands had very, very tight and very great arrangements, but their audience were very sophisticated and becoming a little bored with their arrangements. But by plugging in New Orleans jazz musicians, these guys who could create their own part, still interweaving with what they had exciting new arrangements. Fletcher Henderson chose Louis Armstrong. Paul Whiteman chose Frankie Trumbar on saxophone and Biggs Beiderbecke on cornet. And they both had the same idea at the same time. Fletcher Henderson's band was the first black band that traveled all around, playing for different audiences, white, black, everything, up and down the East Coast. And Louis Armstrong was exposed to this wonderful, wonderful society of people and playing. Also at the time, in New York City, this is where all in Chicago and New York cities were the centers of recorded music at that time. And in New York, they heard this young cornetist, and they said, we want to play some recordings. Louis Armstrong did all kinds of recordings up in New York City with great people like Bessie Smith and just playing some incredible stuff along with the Fletcher Henderson band. But every time Fletcher Henderson recorded the vocal part, they wouldn't let Louis Armstrong sing. They always hired a different vocalist. And Louis Armstrong couldn't figure out, because he thought he had a beautiful singing voice. So about after a year and a half of this, Louis had enough. He went back to Chicago, yes, where Lil Hart had waiting for her. Lil Hart's Dreamland Syncopators at the Dreamland Ballroom, featuring the world's greatest cornetist, Louis Armstrong. And he came in the first night and played, and said, well, Lil, I appreciate you having this, but I no longer play cornet, I play trumpet. Fletcher Henderson changed him to playing trumpet instead of cornet. And that's the instrument that Louis heard in his head. Ever since then, he was a trumpet player. And he said, beside Lil, I think the world's greatest cornetist is Joe Oliver, King Oliver, my mentor. So the next night, the band was changed. Lil Hart's Dreamland Syncopators, featuring the world's greatest trumpeter, Louis Armstrong. And Louis Armstrong was making, at this time, 1925, $250 a week. $250 a week. Think about that. You could buy a Ford Model T Roadster for $269. So he was making a car a week. That's a good analogy. Yeah. And also, 1925, OK Records, which had recorded Louis Armstrong with King Oliver, said, we want to record with you. And this is again where Louis Armstrong changed music, changed the business. Because he said, all right, I'll record with you under 2 stipulations. And it's the first time an artist ever stipulated to the recording company. He said, I get to pick all the material that I'm recording, and I get to pick the musicians that I'm recording with. And OK Records said, okay. And this is how we got the Hot 5 and Hot 7 recordings of Louis Armstrong. Many people feel these are the greatest recordings of all time. And we're going to do one for you right now. This, on Frank Burns' documentary Jazz, he actually said this quote, many people feel that this is the single greatest recording of all history. It is perfect unto itself. It is perfect, albeit if you had saying jazz, classical, rock and roll, anything, this recording of Louis Armstrong playing the West End Blues is the most perfect. So this is our homage to the master. This is the West End Blues, a Hot 7 from 1927 OK Records. We're going to skip a little bit ahead to 1933. Louis Armstrong goes back to New York City and joins a musical review, Connie's Hot Chocolates, featuring the music of Thomas Fats Waller. Fats Waller said, "I'll be dang, that guy doesn't sing my songs better than I do." And on opening night, the entire orchestra, along with the audience, stood and applauded Louis Armstrong's performance. He went on and did this for 217 more times on Broadway. Yes, he did. Well, let's skip ahead to 1946. By then, Louis Armstrong was the highest paid musician in the world, or almost anywhere, making $8,000 a performance. Yes, but critics charged his big band with being too commercial. And the longtime manager, Joe Glazer, after hearing a radio broadcast where Louis Armstrong was paired with a bunch of his old friends from New Orleans station, decided to form a new band, the All-Stars, featuring Velma Middleton on vocals, Sid Catlett, Argo Shaw, and the incomparable Jack Teagarden.
Gonna be in my lungs, blame is down from his old rocking chair.
Mother, my troubles I see.
Jack, you're gonna take the other. You haven't done this in weeks. All right. Louis, what? I forgot the last line. You better take it. Yeah!
So I would say that Louis Armstrong means Duke Ellington instead of Louis Armstrong. A great and truly original man who inspired countless people, inspired countless trumpeters, enchanted millions of fans who quite simply called him friend. Louis Armstrong. After years of heart trouble, Louis Armstrong passed away in the morning of July 6th, right after celebrating his 71st birthday in 1971. It's hard to say what he means to us. The great Dizzy Gillespie said, he's the creator of our language on the trumpet. He is everything unto himself. No sentences, no words, just the name is enough. Louis Armstrong. I see fields of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue, clouds of white, bright blessed day, the dark sacred night. I think to myself, what a wonderful world. All the colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, sign also in the faces of people passing by. Friends shaking hands, said, how do you do? They really say, I love you. I hear babies cry. Oh, I watch them grow. They learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, yes, what a wonderful world. Hope you enjoyed our tribute to Louis Armstrong. Again, this is available on our tribute CD, St. Louis Armstrong, available on the corner. And how about a big hand for a special guest, Sarah Presty. There you go, Sarah Presty. Thank you very much. Did you have a good time? I want to thank our sound guys for doing a great job too. And how about all the volunteers on this festival, everybody in the Red Vest. Thank you so much. Without you, they wouldn't be here. And also, all of our fans and everybody that really comes and comes that's keeping jazz alive right here, Clearwater Beach. Thank you very much. And we'll see you again tonight. I think at 6:45, so come on by. We got a lot of stuff to do. Until then, yes, I love you. Keep your mind. Yeah. Independence Day for the Midiris brothers, right on this very stage. Coming up next. Yeah. Woo!
tune by the Gaithers called There's Something About That Name. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, we'd like to feature Mr. Bob Leary, because I need to catch my breath.
Don't think about that, Bob.
Talk amongst yourselves for a second. We did a very sad song this morning. We're going to do another one right now. Gee, but it's tough to be broke, kid. It's not a joke, kid. It's a curse. My luck is changing. It's gotten from simply rotten to something worse. I know someday I will win through. I'll begin to reach my prime. Till then I know what our end is. All I can spend is just my time. Love, baby, that's the only thing I've plenty of, baby. Dream a while, scheme a while, you're sure to find happiness, and I guess all the things you always pine for. I'd love to see you looking swell, baby. Bracelets full of words doesn't sound. Baby, till that lucky day, you know darn well, baby, I can give you anything but love, gentlemen.
Mr. Bob Leary.
Thank you.
Well, you're pretty funny looking from down there.
You should talk.
We were here yesterday in this room. We did an arrangement, and somebody missed it, and they requested that we play it again. And I'm certainly pleased to do it because this is a special occasion for me right now. Because there was a student I taught when he was in high school, all through high school, and he moved down here to the Tampa area, and we had a kind of reunion this afternoon. So he's in the audience this afternoon, Mr. Chris Kennedy, and he's here to enjoy the band, and so I'm so pleased to have a former student here. Now that he's had a chance to hear Joe play, he wants his money back. Joe, how many years did he study with you? 4 years. 4 years. That's once a week, 52 weeks a year, an hour every week alone in a room with Joe. No wonder he became a minister. You know, I think that was nothing. I had to spend 9 months alone in a room with you.
I got nothing. Actually, I was staying at Joe's house a couple months ago, and his son is, well, at that time he's 11 years old, now he's 12. And so Joe came down for breakfast before I came down, and Joey's in the kitchen. He sees Joe come through the dining room, and he runs up to Joe, and he says, Uncle Paul, and gives him a big hug. And Joe looks down and says, that's fine, Joey, but I'm your daddy. And honest to God, he looks up and says, yeah, but you look the same at a distance.
You know, he's at that age where he can start to learn to play a musical instrument, and I said to him, and I'm at that age where I should know better, but and I said to him, I said, what instrument would you like to play? And he said, I'd like to play the clarinet. And I said, well, why do you want to play the clarinet? He says, I want to be better than you. And I said, why don't you play vibes like your uncle? It'll be a lot easier. He's just upset because he can't figure out why his son looks like me. And being the typical uncle, I spoil him, and we have little pet names for each other. He calls me Dad, and I call him Son. Who turned the heat on?
shine. Hide it under a bushel, no. I let it shine, oh shine, let it shine. As I said before, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This light of mine, yes, let it shine, let it shine, shine, let it shine. Bum, 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 ding, bum, 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 ding, bum, bum, ding, bum, bum, ding, bum, 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 ding, bum, 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 ding, bum, ding, bum, bum, ding, bum, do, bum, ding, ding, bum, 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 bum. Oh, Baba don't day, Baba don't day, Baba don't day, Baba day, Swing it out there, let that light shine out there, Mr. Dance Live, really good.
Thank you very much. Before we get a couple more tunes, and before we end the set, I would like to do a tribute to one of my favorite clarinet players.
Yourself?
And boy, they're all ganging up on me, you know. You better watch yourself. Next year, he'll be appearing as the Midiris Brother Band. Thank God. Anyway, we'd like to play a tribute to Artie Shaw. Artie was a great innovator, great clarinet player. He discovered a high range few people knew existed. He wrote many of the arrangements the band played. He was also a great songwriter. He wrote great tunes like Any Old Time, Would You Like to Be the Love of My Life, and songs like that. But I guess the thing about Shaw that I admire the most was that he was an only child. I don't want to look. Is he still on stage? In case you're wondering, Paul's a minute older than I am. You'd think that'd make him a lot smarter. Begin to begin.
Joe Midiris, ladies and gentlemen. Before we play our next number, I do want to mention we do have CD sales. The corner back in the corner of the Mr. Dan Tobias on the trumpet, Bob Leary on the guitar, Jack Hedgie on the string bass, Mr. Jimmy Lowe on the drums, Paul Midiris at the vibraphone, and Joe Midiris at the clarinet. Thank you. And very special thanks to our sponsor, Don. Thank you. You've been a great audience. Be sure to visit our CD.